Austin has a way of feeling both wide open and suffocating at the same time. That morning, the city was all sunlight and glass, but inside the Solis Corps conference room, it might as well have been midnight in a locked vault. The air was cool and dry, smelling faintly of coffee that had been poured an hour ago and left to stale. Emma Price, my wife, stood at the far end of the table, head of human resources, polished, composed. Her suit was that shade of navy that photographs well in annual reports. She had her hair pinned back in a way that made her cheekbones look like they could cut through glass. She didn't look directly at me when she said it. Noah Grant's compensation will be adjusted by 60%, effective next cycle, she announced, her voice even and deliberate, as though she was reading from a weather report. I suggest you consider whether this role still makes sense for you. The words landed like cold coins in a metal tray. The other managers glanced at each other, unsure if they just witnessed a routine HR decision or the public gutting of a colleague. Of course, none of them knew we were married. That was the way Emma wanted it. Professional boundaries, she called it, though in practice it meant I lived in two separate worlds that weren't supposed to overlap. I sat back in my chair, forcing my face into something neutral. There's a strange kind of humiliation in pretending you're not humiliated, especially when the person doing it knows every angle of your expression. Emma moved to the head of the table and began stacking the papers she'd distributed, lining up each corner with mechanical precision. That's when it happened. A small ping from her smartwatch, barely audible over the hum of the HVAC. She glanced at it for a split second, and I caught the preview. Suite 814. Key at front desk. The sender's name was just as sharp and precise as the rest of her. Mason. I'd met Mason Hall once in the cafeteria line. Project coordinator. Young, sharp-eyed, good at remembering names that weren't his. I had no reason to think about him until now. Emma didn't react. Not outwardly. She flicked the notification away with the same movement she used to silence her morning alarm. Then spoke again, her voice carrying for the benefit of the whole room. Logistical coordination for next week's delegation. Group bookings at the Crescent, she said. No one had asked. No one needed clarification. But she gave it anyway, each word like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. From where I sat, I could see the faint reflection of the room in the black gloss of the conference table. My own face looked like I'd been carved out of wax. A couple of department heads were pretending to review their notes. Others kept their eyes fixed on Emma. It was easier that way, pretend nothing out of the ordinary was happening. I'd seen Emma handle difficult conversations before. She was good at it. Measured, controlled, giving just enough explanation to keep people from asking dangerous questions. This was the same. Except it wasn't. Not for me. The notification burned in the back of my mind. Suite 814 wasn't the kind of phrase you could explain away with corporate jargon. Not when it came with key at front desk. It painted an image before I could stop it. Hotel corridors, muffled footsteps, the sound of a card sliding into a lock. Any questions? Emma asked the room. No one spoke. She gathered her laptop, clicked the clasp on her leather folder, and gave the group a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then that's all for today. The meeting broke apart in the way meetings do. Chairs scraping, the shuffle of papers, polite murmurs about next week's deadlines. I stayed seated, letting the others leave first. Emma didn't look at me, didn't give even the smallest sign that we'd be going home together later, eating at the same table, sleeping in the same bed. When the room was nearly empty, she turned to leave. I caught her eye for a fraction of a second. It wasn't anger I saw there, it was calculation, the quiet checking of variables. Then she was gone, her heels clicking down the hallway, the sound getting swallowed by the carpet. I sat there for another full minute, staring at the polished table. On the surface, it was nothing more than an HR manager doing her job, enforcing corporate decisions without favoritism. But that was the thing. Emma had always been able to make the extraordinary look ordinary, to fold personal strategy into professional procedure so seamlessly that no one noticed the seams. Outside the glass wall, I could see the city glittering in the afternoon light. I wondered if anyone in that skyline could tell the exact moment when the ground under them shifted, or if they only realized it after the building started to tilt. When I finally stood, the chair made a sound that seemed too loud for the quiet room. I slid my notebook into my bag, though I hadn't written anything down. I was thinking about the way she'd explained Mason's message before anyone had even asked. I was thinking about how she'd insisted, from day one, that our marriage stay invisible at work. And I was thinking about how Suite 814 wasn't part of any project plan I'd ever seen. As I walked out into the hallway, the air felt different, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. On the drive back from the office, I let Austin spool past my windshield like a film I'd seen too many times. Muraled walls, taco trucks, glass towers pretending to be merciful. The AC hissed. The dashboard clock glowed an indifferent 5:42. I kept replaying that ping on Emma's wrist. Suite 814. Key at front desk. In the quiet box of my car, every earlier moment I'd filed under no big deal started crawling out of their folders and lining up in a row. 6 months. That's how far back the pattern runs when I'm honest with myself. Little edits to life, each one small enough to swallow alone. First, Shike * led family location sharing. Battery drain, she said with a quick smile. Toggling the setting off while we were standing in line at HEB felt like turning off a porch light. I told myself it was nothing. Privacy is healthy, Noah, stop being a cop. Then the message threads. Whole conversations gone, like a bookshelf with gaps where your favorite paperbacks used to be. Cleaning up storage, she said, waving her phone like a magician's empty hand. New threads would start mid-sentence, as if the beginning had moved to someplace I wasn't allowed. The evening offsites followed. She began calling them that, casual like a happy hour wearing a blazer. Tuesdays, sometimes Thursdays. Client culture alignment, she'd say, grabbing a jacket I'd never seen before. Something sharp with a faint, expensive sheen. She'd kiss my cheek, already half turned toward the door, and I'd smell something new on her. Bergamot, cedar, the ghost of a hotel lobby. Receipts for 2 stack highest in the pile. I found the first one in our junk drawer under a tangle of rubber bands. A bar in the warehouse district, 2 cocktails with names that sounded like mixtapes. She laughed when I asked. Kara and I ordered the same thing and the server doubled it. Relax. She was good at using other people's names like drop cloths. Cover the furniture. Keep the paint off the floor. There was the lingerie. A glossy box from a brand I recognized from an anniversary 3 years ago, except I hadn't bought it this time. No holiday, no birthday, no comment. She tucked it into the back of her dresser with the same care you'd use to slide a secret back into the wall. When I asked, she smiled without her eyes and said, retail therapy. HR is a meat grinder. A bank alert flagged couple massage, 2 aromatherapy, at a spa we'd never visited. When I forwarded it to her with a question mark, she replied, error on their end. I comped a gift card for an employee and it hit our account by mistake. I'll reverse it. She did, technically. The refund landed 3 days later, like an obedient dog. The story still smelled off. Boutique hotel districts became her GPS breadcrumbs. Conference rooms by day, team socials by night. I'd check her calendar when she forgot to lock her laptop. Blocks of gray labeled vendor check-in that started at 7:30 p.m. in parts of town where the valet stands outnumber the parking meters. If I asked what vendor needed a check-in at 9 p.m, she'd give me a masterclass in benign expressions. International folks, different time zones. The AirTag went missing next. I noticed at a gas station, keys in my palm, the familiar white disc not catching the light. Took it off, she said. Creeps can track you with those. TikTok said so. I told her the AirTag was ours, not theirs. She shrugged, as if the difference had become theoretical. And always, the insistence that we keep our marriage invisible at work. Early on it had felt like a conspiracy only we were in on, thrilling in a high school hallway sort of way. Lately it felt like a liability, mine specifically. Optics, she'd say. HR can't have entanglements. She made it sound like she was protecting me, but it landed like I'd been put in witness protection from my own life. There were smaller tells that didn't fit neatly in a spreadsheet. The way she'd turn her phone face down, then upside down again, as if both sides could give her away. The new passcode length. The laughter that arrived late, like it had to travel from somewhere far away to reach the surface. How she sat farther from me on the couch, almost imperceptibly at first, just a cushion and then two. I tried to be a responsible narrator of my own life. I told myself stories that made me the reasonable one. She's stressed. HR is thankless. You're projecting. Everyone deletes messages. Couples evolve. Don't police. Don't be your father. The mind is creative when it wants to protect the heart. But the evidence kept rehearsing itself. My phone buzzed one night with a fraud alert about a hotel bar tab, my card on a joint account we barely used. When I asked, she told me it was a work block booking. They had to put cards on file. It'll fall off. It did, like several other charges that came and went with the tide. Another night, I found an Uber receipt for a ride from a boutique hotel to a residential street 2 miles from our house. Except she told me she'd had dinner on the east side and walked with the girls after. When I asked who, she gave me names that didn't know each other last time I checked. Work friends become real friends, she said. And I felt something crack. Not loud. Just the sound a hairline fracture makes when you put weight on it. Even our apartment had an echo to it I couldn't place. Her plants started dying, the ones she used to baby with misting bottles and podcasts about soil pH. Shoes she used to kick off by the door now lined up with military discipline. Ready to walk out again. Our fridge had more tiny hotel butters than groceries. She bought new wine glasses but stopped opening wine with me. There was the new lingerie bag she found on sale, still with the tissue paper folded like a promise. The stray bobby pin on the passenger side floor mat when she rarely sat there. The scent of unfamiliar cologne lingering in the hallway some nights, just long enough to make me feel ridiculous and then angry for feeling ridiculous. I had my own changes, too. I stopped asking what time she'd be home. I stopped reheating dinner. I picked up our son Caleb on Fridays for movie night and kept the popcorn bowls from clattering when the text came in. Running late, sorry. Proud of you, boys. On weeks he was with me, the apartment felt honest, like furniture remembers who sits in it. On the off weeks, silence felt like a roommate. The missing piece, and I hate admitting this, was my willingness. I wanted to be the guy who believes his wife, who doesn't turn into a detective with a corkboard and red string. I wanted to be the guy who chalks up patterns to coincidence and grows from it. But every coincidence was wearing the same shoes. The last 6 months wasn't a storm. It was a staging. She moved boundaries first, then accounts, then narratives. She tested alibis to see which ones flew in headwinds. She trained our lives to accept her absence by degrees until one day absence looked like policy. I kept thinking about that watch ping in the room full of colleagues who didn't know I was her husband. Suite 814. Key at front desk. The message was a skeleton key. My memory opened doors I'd locked and forgotten. I remembered the first time she told me to keep our rings in our pockets for a client dinner. Investors assume things, she'd said, light, joking, but her eyes were steel. I remembered how quickly she learned everyone's love languages at work and used the right one on the right day. I remembered how, after big arguments, she'd buy pastries for my team and apologize to them before she apologized to me, like she was drafting consensus in case we ever needed a vote. There were trips she took to hotel districts for site tours, and every time she came back with a tote bag branded by a place that sells sleep as a lifestyle. She brought me soaps I never used, lotions that smelled like expensive rain, and stories with edges sanded down until they were too smooth to grip. I don't know when suspicion turns to knowledge. Maybe it's not a moment but an accumulation, like sediment until the river changes course. Driving home, I watched the sun turn the glass towers gold, and I tried to make my mind hold two truths. The woman I married, and the woman who could lower my salary by 60% in a public room and call it governance. I hit a red light and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I looked tired in a way sleep can't fix. My phone lit up with a calendar alert about Emma's off-site block next Thursday, location. Hidden. I'd never noticed that field before. Hidden from who? By the time I turned onto our street, the pattern had stopped asking for permission to be real. It just sat there on the passenger seat like a box I didn't remember carrying, heavy, taped shut, addressed in my own handwriting. Upstairs, the hallway smelled like someone else's cologne. Maybe from a neighbor, maybe not. The small bulbs in the ceiling hummed. Our door clicked the same way it always clicked. Inside, everything was exactly where we left it. That's the most unsettling thing about change before it breaks. You can set a glass down and it stays a glass. But you know it's already a shard in waiting. I hung my keys on the hook, the ring lighter without the AirTag, and stood there long enough to notice the quiet. I wasn't ready to look for proof yet. First I needed to admit I'd been seeing it all along. By the time evening fell, I wasn't driving home. I was parked in a grocery lot, staring at the glow of my laptop through the windshield. The aftertaste of the day clung to me. Emma's voice in the glass-walled conference room, the sterile way she'd cut my salary, the smartwatch ping like it was nothing. I signed into the corporate network from my car, the dashboard vents blowing cold air onto my knuckles. SolisCore's shared calendar opened in another tab, nothing unusual at first glance. Then I filtered for bookings at the Crescent Hotel. Mason Hall's name popped up, Thursday through Saturday, under Vendor Coordination Suite. That suite number hit me like a slap. 814. Booked by Mason. Checked in at 2:14 p.m. Today. I dug deeper. Electronic receipts. Per diem expenses. Mason had logged a dinner tab at the Crescent's rooftop restaurant, 2 entrees, 2 desserts, a bottle of Syrah. The timestamp was an hour before Emma's meeting ended. The world tilted, but I didn't stop. I pulled up the property map, matched the elevator bank to the suite level. My hand was already on the gearshift before my mind gave the order. The Crescent sat in one of those boutique hotel pockets of Austin, where the streetlights glow soft and the air smells like cedar mulch and wine. I parked a block away. Inside, the lobby was all marble and orchids. A couple in evening were past me on their way out, laughing too loud. I caught the elevator up, the carpet swallowing the sound of my shoes. The hallway outside 814 was quiet. Too quiet. Then a sound, low male voice, muffled by the door. A woman's laugh followed, quick and warm. The kind you give when you're leaning in close. I took out my phone. My thumb trembled, but I pressed record. A service cart stood parked against the wall, draped in white linen. 2 plates of half-finished dinner, a wine bottle breathing beside them. The smell of roast lamb and rosemary hung in the air. The door opened suddenly. Emma stepped out first, in a silk blouse I hadn't seen before, hair looser than it had been at the office. Mason followed, jacket off, his tie loose. They were smiling in that way people smile when they've been alone together long enough to forget the rest of the world. Her hand brushed his shoulder. Not a pat, not a thank you, something slower, lingering. Neither saw me. I stepped back around the corner, kept filming until they turned toward the elevator. The photos and clips went straight into a red folder on my desktop, timestamps, metadata, chain of custody intact. By the time I sat behind my steering wheel, I wasn't shaking anymore. I was cold. At home, I didn't pour a drink or pace the floor. I opened my contacts and found the number for the chair of SolisCore's Ethics and Audit Committee. He answered on the second ring. "This is Grant," I said, my voice even. "I have evidence of a conflict of interest involving your head of HR and a subordinate. There's also a retaliatory action taken against my position today. You're going to want to see this immediately." I sent the file before he could ask. Silence on the line as he opened it, punctuated only by the faint clack of a mouse. "We'll convene tonight," he said finally. "Noah. Thank you for bringing this forward." 2 hours later, Emma's system access was restricted. An unscheduled investigation launched. The committee cited potential abuse of authority, personal misconduct, and breach of company policy. Somewhere in the city, the woman I'd married was learning she wasn't untouchable. And I was learning I didn't need to raise my voice to bring the ceiling down. You said, "Next part. Remember that each part must contain strictly 7,000 characters. ChatGPT said, Part 4, Strategic Exit and Legal Clarity, Noah's POV. The night after the call to the ethics chair, I slept better than I expected. Not deep, not dreamless, but without that gut-grinding churn that had been my constant for months. When I woke, The air felt still. Emma hadn't come home. I didn't wonder where she'd been. I showered, dressed in the same charcoal suit I'd worn 3 years ago when we'd signed Soliscor's first major client together. I picked it on purpose. Symbols matter. By 7:15 a.m., I was driving north on I-35 toward Dallas. My phone sat in the cup holder, screen dark, but I knew the Meridian Works recruiter would be expecting me. We talked in vague terms over the past month. Mostly me feeling out the market, quietly testing the waters without making a splash. At the time, I wasn't thinking escape. I was thinking leverage. Now, leverage had turned into a lifeline. Meridian Works' lobby was the opposite of Soliscor's glass and steel austerity. Warm wood tones, live plants, real daylight streaming in. I'd barely finished my coffee when the VP of Operations shook my hand and slid an offer letter across the table. Higher base than I'd been making before Emma's little HR stunt. Performance bonuses. Stock options with a vesting schedule generous enough to feel like confidence. I read every line twice, but the real moment of release came when I hit page 3. No non-compete clause. I almost laughed. The absence wasn't an oversight. It was a feature. Still, I asked the question. We're aware Soliscor tries to lock down senior staff, the VP said. But our counsel checked your public filings. Your job classification last year was, let's call it unusual. Unusual was polite. It was a misclassification, a clerical error Emma's own department had processed when HR merged 2 roles under my title. It stripped the standard non-compete from my contract and downgraded my official job scope on paper. Probably meant as an internal the morning after I called the Ethics and Audit Committee. The apartment was still. Not the normal weekday stillness of 2 people at work, but the hollow kind that follows a detonation. Emma hadn't come home, and for the first time I didn't picture where she might be or who she might be with. My mind didn't need to wander anymore. I woke before my alarm, the kind of alertness that comes when your next step is already decided. The air had that crisp, pre-dawn coolness leaking in from the balcony, and I stood there for a minute, watching the eastern edge of Austin glow faintly orange. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was a pause, and I'd take it. I pulled my charcoal suit from the garment bag. The same one I'd worn 3 years ago when Emma and I, as a united front, had signed Soliscor's first major client. That day, she'd whispered "power couple" in my ear as the ink dried. I chose it now for the symmetry, the quiet satisfaction of wearing the uniform of our rise as I prepared to stage my exit. By 7:10 a.m., I was heading north on I-35 toward Dallas. The city thinned out behind me, replaced by scrubland and the occasional billboards for injury lawyers. My phone sat silent in the cup holder. I wasn't waiting for a call from Emma, and I didn't need one from the recruiter. Meridian Works and I had been circling each other for weeks. What had started as casual, exploratory talks had turned into something sharper once the cracks at Soliscor widened. Meridian Works headquarters couldn't have been more different from Soliscor's glass and steel austerity. Warm oak paneling. Actual plants, not plastic. A reception desk where the person greeting you looked like they genuinely enjoyed doing it. I'd barely finished the coffee the receptionist handed me before the VP of Operations appeared. All firm handshake and direct eye contact, leading me to a corner office with a view over the city. We didn't waste time on small talk. An offer letter slid across the desk, the paper weighty and deliberate. I scanned the numbers. Higher base salary than I'd earned before Emma's HR ambush, generous performance bonuses, and stock options that vested on a timeline designed to signal they actually wanted me to stay. My pulse stayed steady until I hit page 3. That's when I nearly smiled. No non-compete clause. I asked anyway because I needed to hear it said. We're aware Soliscor tries to lock down senior staff, the VP said. But we did our homework. Your job classification last year was unusual. Unusual was the polite term for it. Last year, during a departmental merger, Emma's own HR division had processed my role incorrectly, folding it into a mid-tier classification that stripped the standard non-compete clause entirely. On paper, I wasn't in a sensitive strategic role at all. In reality, I'd been managing 7 major accounts and leading client integration for multimillion-dollar projects. The kicker? That error had been signed off by Emma herself. I remembered her brushing it off at the time. "Just a template glitch," she'd said. "Don't worry, it doesn't change anything important." She was right until now, when it changed everything important. I initialed the key pages, signed, and shook hands on a start date that was barely a week away. As I walked back to my car with the folder under my arm, I realized I wasn't smiling. The satisfaction was quieter than that, solid, weighty. The drive back to Austin was straight out of a montage. Highway unspooling, my tie loosened, the decision made. No dramatic music, just the hum of the tires and the steady click of the turn signal, as I took the exit toward Solis Corps one last time as an employee. The parking garage was the same, but it felt smaller. I carried nothing but my briefcase and that signed offer letter. In the elevator, I caught my reflection. Straight back, eyes steady. When the doors opened, the floor was quieter than usual. Conversations dipped as I passed, not because anyone knew yet, but because silence is contagious. I went straight to my office, placed my badge and a 2-sentence resignation letter in an envelope, and walked it to the CEO's assistant. She looked up, startled. "Is this?" "It's effective immediately," I said. "HR would have to process it without Emma." I knew her access had been restricted the night before. There was a certain satisfaction in that, my resignation traveling through the same channels she once used to cut my pay, but without her hands on the controls. Protocol required a security escort for same-day departures at my level. The guard was polite, professional, offering to carry my bag. I declined. Walking out, I passed the conference room where Emma had made her announcement less than 48 hours earlier. The blinds were drawn now. I could almost see her there, delivering her lines, making it look procedural. It struck me that she'd always been good at manufacturing inevitability, right up until the moment she wasn't. The guard keyed me through the glass lobby doors. Behind us, the Solis Corps logo gleamed under recessed lights, sharp and expensive. Ahead, the Texas sun was bright enough to make me squint. In the elevator reflection that morning, I'd looked like someone on the verge of leaving. Out here, I just looked like someone who already had. I didn't head home right away. I took a detour to the Meridian Works building, riding the elevator up to the floor that would soon be mine. I didn't announce myself or linger, just stepped out, looked around, felt the difference in the air. Then I left, knowing I'd be back in a week, not as a visitor, but as someone who'd traded secrecy and retaliation for a clean slate. That night, I hung the charcoal suit back in its bag. I didn't pour a drink. I didn't check my phone for messages from her. The offer letter sat on my desk, a physical fact no HR system could override. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about what Emma was doing or where she was. I was thinking about what I was building next, and the fact that I'd get to do it without anyone quietly rewriting the rules beneath my feet. The Monday after I walked out of Solis Corps, I sat at a new desk in a new building with a new badge clipped to my belt. Meridian Works wasn't just a change of address, it was a change of gravity. My inbox filled with introductions instead of veiled reprimands, and every meeting ended with action items that didn't involve navigating someone's ego. I could breathe without checking if my breathing inconvenienced anyone. On my first day, I laid out a principle for my new team: no hidden clauses. It wasn't just about contracts, it was about everything. Project changes? Share them. Client issues? Surface them early. No one was going to wake up blindsided on my watch. I didn't solicit Solis Corps' clients. I didn't need to. Within 2 weeks, the first call came from a procurement lead I'd worked with for years. "We heard you're at Meridian now," she said. "Any chance you're open to a vendor conversation?" I explained the ethical boundaries, no active poaching, and she laughed softly. "You don't need to poach, Noah. We're looking for stability and the leadership over there." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. By the end of the month, 3 major accounts had moved their business to us. 2 more signed pilot projects without my asking. They cited trust, delivery, and, repeatedly, concerns about Solis Corps' internal culture. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The updates came through the industry grapevine, sometimes disguised as casual gossip. Emma's cultural transformation initiatives, her pet HR programs, were frozen by the board. New approvals were routed through an interim committee. Recruitment slowed. Departures increased. By late summer, financial reports leaked. Revenue dips, client churn, project overruns. Internally, the whispers turned into murmurs. The compliance investigation had expanded. The original scope, misconduct with a subordinate, was now joined by abuse of authority and concealment of conflicts of interest. I imagined her reading those words in an email with the header privileged and confidential. I didn't gloat, at least not publicly, but there was a certain cold symmetry to it. The same machinery she once used to position herself untouchable was now turning on her, gears grinding with no one left to oil them. One afternoon, I ran into an old Solis Corps colleague in the lobby of a client's office. He hesitated before shaking my hand. "It's different over there without you," he said carefully. Then, after a glance toward the elevators, "And without her, you've probably heard." Her role had been temporarily reassigned, while the investigation continued. Temporary, in corporate language, can mean anything from 3 weeks to never again. At Meridian Works, my calendar was full but predictable. My evenings were mine. I started cooking again, real meals, not just reheated takeout. Caleb and I reestablished Friday movie nights. Sometimes, halfway through a bad action flick, I'd realize I hadn't thought about Emma in hours. The first time that happened, I felt something close to freedom. Industry news sites began picking up on Solis Corps' troubles. Headlines about internal restructuring and leadership realignment danced around the details, but anyone who knew the players could read between the lines. Anonymous quotes from sources close to the matter hinted at HR overreach, toxic decision-making, and retaliation against senior staff. I didn't confirm anything, but I didn't correct anyone either. Silence, I'd learned, is often more powerful than explanation. By the end of the quarter, Meridian Works had added 3 new hires from Solis Corps, people I respected, people who understood the importance of transparent process. They brought stories with them, of meetings that ended abruptly when Emma's name came up, of policy reversals, of high-value employees leaving without notice. It was like watching a slow collapse from a safe distance. Not joy, not vengeance, just inevitability. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I got a text from a friend still at Solis Corps. "She's out of the loop now. Can't touch payroll, can't touch hiring. Board has a closed session next week." I stared at the screen for a moment, then slipped the phone into my pocket. There was nothing to say. She had built her authority like a tower, brick by brick, and now she was standing inside it while the walls came down. In Works, I